YouTube.
Ah,
Yeah, so you can watch it later. It's just got.
I might be watching later.
Hmm?
I might be watching
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
I
Oh, there's one person there. Okay. So welcome everyone. I think we're all connected. People here and also out there in YouTube land. So Alan here with our third class on topic of Samsara and Nirvana. So as usual, I think it's best if we start with 5 minutes breathing meditation as we usually do. So get comfortable. If anyone wants to sit on the floor, there's plenty of cushions. Okay, so now just come into our inner world. Time to let go of the busy day we've just had. Just get comfortable, sitting, lying. Just a moment to appreciate our great good fortune to be able to sit together, do some practice together. Doing our practice not just for our own benefit, the benefit of others. Just coming into our body, checking our back is reasonably straight, shoulders relaxed, face muscles relaxed, arm muscles relaxed. Feel the weight of the body on the chair, on the floor. Giving ourselves to gravity. Using the out breath to let go. Letting go all the tension in the body, distractions in the mind. And then gradually giving more attention to our breathing, watching the breath enter and leave the body. Just staying with the breath. Just checking now and again where we are. If we have left the breath, distracted by thoughts, don't worry, just a thought. Gently let go of distraction, come back to the breath. Just watching the breath. Nothing to control, nothing to change. breath, full flow of the in-breath, the full flow of the out-breath. Okay, so just relaxing. Hopefully you've got your notes for this week, which I sent out yesterday. So this is the third of 4 weeks on the topic. But, last week we didn't quite finish what I had in the notes, so we'll just finish that off. But maybe before that, we'll just look at those 3 questions from last week, just to give us a bit of a chance to revise and remember what happened. So remember, basically we're doing the Four Noble Truths, these teachings that the Buddha gave, the first teachings he gave in Sama, northern India. And the 4 truths basically are the truths of suffering, that suffering exists. Who else? Who can actually tell me, maybe offhand, the 4 truths? Suffering's the first, that suffering exists. Remember the 3 types of suffering? Suffering of suffering, so, which is the obvious one. That's getting injured, old age, sickness, death, and it includes mental suffering as well.
So that suffering has causes?
Suffering has causes. Okay, so suffering doesn't just happen at random. It's dependent on cause and conditions, like everything, or phenomena. Suffering depends on cause and condition.
Cessation of suffering?
Cessation, yeah. Is that cessation? Yeah, so cessation, is that suffering. So when we looked at causes, we actually just looked at some of the different type. The two main causes are that we have karmic imprints, like things that we've done in the past are going to affect us now and in the future. And there's what they call the afflictions, which are things that we make mistakes, things that basically most common definition is that they disturb the mind. So anger, attachment, ignorance, pride, and so on. Okay, so that's basically what we looked at last week. And the different ways of categorising these things, ones I've always called them disturbing thoughts. But the most common one is the one we looked at, the 6 root afflictions, which is, that's the first question tonight, so let's look at them. So the first one's, what's the first one? Attachment. Anger, yeah. Ignorance. They say that they're often seen as the core of the main one. And the other ones? Doubt. Pride.
Pride, doubt. No, is it?
Yeah.
Pride,
Doubt. And like wrong views.
Wrong views.
So wrong views actually covers things like ignorance, like thinking that everything is existing on the out there inherently, including the self, separate from everything else. But it also covers things like thinking there's no such thing as karma, and that there's only this life, no afterlife, and so on. So things that go against sort of the basic Buddhist principle. So that's that one. And then the counter forces, or the ways of countering the root afflictions. So we haven't actually done that yet, so we can get to that. We had a quick look at it last week. So so basically, what these kind of forces are part of the way to deal with the suffering and the causes and so on. So the path. So I suppose it's really good to have. I'm following really the Dalai Lama's procedures or sequences in the book that's I mentioned in the reading list. So so he says there's 2 counter forces to these 6 root afflictions, and they're all-encompassing, which is basically the fault that we all have from birth. It's like ingrained, which is the not understanding that everything is dependent, and realizing the wisdom realizing emptiness is the solution. So the fault is seeing everything existing from its own side as concrete, including the biggest fault, the self. There's a me here that exists from its own side inherently. And so Buddhism rejects this idea that there's anything concrete there. It accepts this self, but only as something that's labelled or imputed on this collection of body and mind that we've got. We've obviously got something here. But the mistake that we all have ingrained, and it's hard to get rid of, only when we become fully enlightened can we actually shed this ingrained ignorance that we are some sort of inherent existing being here. So that's sort of that's a hard one to get rid of, and takes a lot of practice. Probably not in this lifetime. The Buddha, it said that although the Buddha seemed to become enlightened in one lifetime, that's basically the view taught mainly in the Theravada tradition, that he was born in the palace, and then he went through various stages of asceticism, trying different things with different people, giving up food and doing these ascetic practices which didn't work. And then he actually went and meditated under the Bodhi tree and became enlightened. But the Tibetan Buddhists or Mahayana teaching said that happened, but it was a lot of work in previous lifetimes to get him to many lifetimes for them. They'd actually practiced and made progress from one lifetime to the other. And so it was just this lifetime we see he become enlightened that was like the end of his practice after countless lifetimes of refining his mind, becoming more and more closer to enlightenment. So that's basically what the Tibetan Buddhist approach is, that he manifested, he appeared to become enlightened in one lifetime, but there's actually a lot of stories of how he practiced compassion and so on in previous lifetimes. Very moving story. So that sort of basic problem all beings have until they become enlightened, the not realizing how phenomena exist, how external phenomena exist, and how we exist. But then the other more specific counter forces, which is what the word His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses. So these are like the practices to counter our root afflictions, our delusions, which they're often called. So he gives various, first of all, there's a few general comments there I've got at the top. And remember that the advice I gave last week, the more looking at the things that we've got wrong with us, is not, we shouldn't go to the other extreme and think that we're completely bad and there's no hope for it. So that's basically these afflictions are not us. They're out, they're there, they have causes and conditions. They're based on misunderstandings. And so by tackling causes, the causes of anger and attachment and so on, then gradually we can get rid of them. They can be completely purified. So the Buddhist part is telling us that they can be eliminated completely, just like the Buddha exhibited, and we can become perfect, enlightened beings. Everyone can do it, not just the Buddha. It's open to all of it. But that's the joy of Buddhism in a way, that it's not some sort of thing out there. We can actually start right now on tackling these afflictions or delusions or things that are holding us back. So just the other, so I've made that point, blame the affliction, not the person. And the Dalai Lama gives a good example. He says, for example, if you see somebody doing something wrong, I mean, we're doing things, making mistakes all the time, but if we sort of see someone run a red light, not necessarily have an accident, but it gives the example, some people will immediately blame the driver for being completely bad, ignoring the law, and identifying the driver did that. So the more enlightened approach, he says, is to not get angry at the driver, disagree with his action, which was going through the red light. That was completely wrong. That endangered other people. With his action, which was going through the red light. That was completely wrong. That endangered other people. So by doing that, you're just, and this is an example of how we treat ourselves as well, rather than that when we do something we know is wrong, saying that I'm completely bad and identifying with that mistake. See if the action is wrong. So we can tackle the action by these counter forces. And of course, the simple example we've got there of the person driving carelessly, drive more carefully, respect others, and think about the consequences of your action. So, so this behind all this is these afflictions being ephemeral, not based on firm foundation, and so we can tackle them and remove them by various practices. And the example always used is the idea of clouds in the sky behind perfect, untainted blue sky. Blue sky being our Buddha potential, our Buddha nature, and these afflictions, attachment, greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on, are the clouds that can be pass through the sky without tainting, without polluting the sky. Okay, we need to tackle them and work with to get rid of them. But the Buddha nature, which all beings have, is there, untouched. Fantastic analogy, really. So basically, this essential purity of our minds. So then the other thing is to think of the disadvantages of the affliction. And he says, if we're working on ourselves, we think of our biggest, do some self-analysis, become our own therapists, as Lamishi said. As you read these sort of commentaries and teachings, am I more angry than I am attached? You can sort of get an idea, how often do I lose the temper? How often do I feel pride? How often do I feel great attachment to people and things? So by doing some self-analysis in meditation, we can get to know what we should be working on. We should be working on first. We can look at not just in meditation, but look at our behaviour. So this is mindfulness of our actions. If we find that we're losing our temper at work often, just losing control and offending others by what we do or say, then it might be anger that is the main thing. If we get very attached to things, perhaps we should be working more on attachment. So basically, there's plenty to choose from usually, but he says start with the biggest afflictions. And so for things like anger, hatred and resentment, there are many words for them, or remember annoyance and irritation is part of it. Think of patience. So the opposite of anger is patience or forbearance. So patience covers the situations as well, being really annoyed when there's a hold up in the traffic or things aren't going exactly as we expected them. So you can usually he suggests when in the heat of the moment it's quite hard to counter use the counter force. So if we're very impatient and angry, what's happening, to suddenly be patient. But if we sit in a meditation and visualize the situation that does make us angry, or the person, it's quite a good, very good guided meditation on equanimity, where we visualize the person who annoys us most or makes us most uncomfortable. And we start looking at what's happening. Is it something they did, something we did to them? And we look at various ways of looking at it differently. And over time, repeating the version again and again, we can actually generate a different attitude. It could take weeks, months or years. So we can change that idea of hatred or pushing that person away to the opposite, bringing them into their people that are most important to us. So these are various, we're going to actually do a meditation at the end tonight on attachment, which is quite, I think attachment seems to run through most of the delusions and afflictions, basically the attachment to outside things and also to our own sense of self, which they say is the main culprit, the main thing that keeps us in this psychic existence, attachment to a sense of self. So we'll do that later. A good one, anxiety and doubt. These are all the Dalai Lama's suggestions. If we're feeling probably anxious or just nothing that we can rely on, very good time to look at that with the coronavirus and so on, because everything's being swept from under our feet. Observe the breath, breathing meditation. So that's a very good thing to calm the mind, which is anxious. And remember last week, look at what he said, that anxiety can be generated by expecting things to go wrong, even though they may never go wrong. Just having this sort of dwelling on the worst possible scenario. So that's by looking at what's happening in our mind, just by observing it, can actually diffuse the power of that negative thought or affliction. Okay, so and the other thing for attachment and permanence, these are all guided meditations that we do in the drop-in meditation. Impermanence, just acknowledging that there is actually nothing that is actually going to last. Everything that is created is subject to cause and condition, and those cause and conditions will actually change over time. So accept letting go of things, of this idea that things are permanent, including the fact that our body's changing and we're only here for a short time. It's the biggest impermanence. Death is certain, and time of death is uncertain. So he says we need to apply the antidotes over time when we're not in the heat of the affliction. He gives a little warning: you don't sort of go to the other extreme. And say one of the antidotes to attachment to a person is to examine their person. Imagine the person's insides, the bones, the blood, the brains, the waste matter, and so on. So that's one way of developing less, going beyond the skin is probably the thing that is attracting us, the skin, the look of the person. So he says, if you take that too far, every time you see a human being, you'll develop this sort of revulsion, because you're so used to seeing everything, the insides of people, and so on. So I've never heard any teacher teach that, but he says, just take things in moderation. There's always a way of overdoing it in Buddhism. So the middle way is usually the suggested way that we should be going, the middle way. Geshe Soka said you can even become too attached to the teaching. And if you think about it, religious fanaticism, no matter what brand it is, what it is, could be Judeo-Christian or Islamic or whatever, is just based on attachment to this one belief system, and nothing else is correct. So it's going to that extreme of being attached to an idea or belief. There's a very good book that I read when I just started to get into Buddhism called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa, who was a very great teacher in the West. And he was just warning people that just like you can be over-attached to food, sex or money, you can be over-attached to any belief system, including Buddhism. And you can, by taking it, identifying this is me, so hopping on, I am this, like I am Australian, I am American. So this is where the mistake is, that there is this very concrete me, and I identify as being this. So this is the mistake. So we can become over-attached in many different ways. Okay, other remedies: meditate on impermanence. I'm just looking at page 2. Meditate on death. Death is a great one for letting go of attachment, because we practice the idea of letting go of the body. Body is probably one of our greatest attachments. Spend so much time keeping your body healthy and clean, so on. So that's a good one. Death meditation. Impurities of the body, and the non-true existence. That's the emptiness of the body, of the object. So this is probably the meditation that will actually work with all afflictions, the educational inness. Faith in the Dharma, generate love for others. The other thing is compassion, because the more we look at our the Four Noble Truths, our situation, and realise the truth of those three different types of suffering, the size of the situation we're in, the suffering, the great suffering that we have faced and probably will face, then we feel this connection with other humans or other beings, because everybody who is not an enlightened being is experiencing the same suffering. So it gives you that common humanity, feeling of love for others. So basically that's just finishing off what was in the notes last week. Any question? Anyone want to raise anything? Comments? If not, we'll go on. Okay, so then we're just coming up to the third noble truth, true cessations. But just before that, His Holiness gives us a little bit of a rundown on these terms, afflictions and karma, and the seeds of, we're talking often, usually analogy of karmic seeds on the mind stream. So, and then latencies, which are like seeds but more subtle. So he's just looking at what we mean by afflictions, really, and what these causes of our suffering, second noble truth, what actually they are. So he says there's innate, actually there's a misprint there, where it says innate and subtle afflictions, it should actually be acquired, innate and acquired affliction. So the innate afflictions are the ones that we've already just touched on. Those, the big one is this idea of a self-existent, concrete, truly existent self, and not seeing the dependent nature of all phenomena, including ourselves, what they call dependent variety. But this is one that we've been with us forever. Doesn't mean that it's going to be with us forever, but up to now it's been with us from the beginning. And even in small animals, insects and so on, they have this sense of self that needs to be preserved, and that's an innate fiction. There's no beginning with that, we're told. And then the acquired ones are the ones that we learn or pick up during this lifetime. So he gives the example of, we have this, what he calls innate self-grasping, grasping the sense that I'm truly here. And this allows us to grasp onto certain things. He gives a whole list of things: our nationality, our religion, which I just mentioned, our race, our class, gender, sexual orientation. So while we have this strong sense of self, we can add on to that, to these other ways of loading up, putting icing on the cake. That not only I'm here, and I'm also here in Australia, and I'm a Buddhist, and I'm white, and I'm middle class, and blah blah blah. So this clinging on to this, can be the cause of many of our problems. So these acquired ones, based on us, the afflictions being there, because we think that we're truly here, we think we're also truly all of these qualities, where we are and so on, we're adding on to it. So he says there's other way of distinguishing different afflictions. The coarse ones, I've spelt them wrong, should be the coarse afflictions, it should be C-O-A-R-S-E, not the race course or running the course. It's course C-O-A. So the coarse ones are the ones that we can actually see in our behaviour, like anger, greed, attachment, anxiety sometimes, or you can actually see the symptoms of it. And the subtle one is the grasping of an inherent existence, the one that we can't see but is innate. So that's just another way of classifying these afflictions. So the seeds of these afflictions, we'll come back to this too when we look at the wheel of life. So he says, if we know that if we're prone to anger, we're not angry all the time. It just comes up. So it might come up in certain circumstances when a certain situation arises or person arises, or it might just come up without spontaneously. And so he says, why aren't we angry all the time if we've got this in our mind stream? And so this is explained by this idea of having a seed on the mind stream that is there waiting to be germinated, to come to fruition. So this explains why when we're not actually physically angry or feeling angry or exhibiting anger, it doesn't mean the seed is gone. The seed can still be there, which can flare up again later. That's quite a useful image, the idea of the seed. So, and then the latencies or afflictions, it says these are more, the latencies, yeah, that's right, latencies of affliction. So I think the word that Lama Zopa usually uses is the imprints, but these are more subtle. So he says, Lama Zopa says that even as you progress, you can do practices to purify the seeds of anger, attachment, and so on. And you can progress right up through almost to Buddhahood. And there, in the Mahayana progression towards Buddhahood, there are said to be 10 stages of what they call bodhisattvas. And they call them bhumis, bodhisattva bhumis. So people, beings who are extremely advanced in the practice will enter the bodhisattvas who are spontaneously compassionate to all beings, will enter these 10 different levels. And right up to the 8th level, I'm just putting this in because the Dalai Lama mentioned it, they can have the imprints. They can have destroyed all the seeds of anger. They won't exhibit anger ever. But the imprints, these very subtle latencies are there until they reach the 8th level. That means almost fully enlightened Buddha. And those purifying those latencies is where they become on the road to full Buddhahood. So it's very high state. After they pass the 8th level, as they continue their practice, the imprints are purified, and they can't go back. They can never go back to lower levels of their spiritual development. So this idea of late seeds and latencies, quite a little bit esoteric, but I think that the idea of the seeds that you often hear in the Lama teachings, what the seeds of. So it's the karma. The teachers on karma use the analogy of seeds all the time. Everything that we do, say, and think, all our activities, body, speech, and mind, positive and negative, leave either positive or negative seeds on the mind stream. And so, which, unless they're purified, if they're negative, will come to fruition. That's what teachings on karma. Karma is definite unless we purify it. So that's just the little bit of background there about those different types of, more about afflictions. Okay. Feel free to ask anything. So now looking at the third noble truth, true cessations. Okay, so we've got the first noble truth that suffering exists, unless we realise the scope of our illness, how serious it is, we're not going to even go to the doctor. So causes, what are the causes of this illness? You need to know what the causes are before we have the medicine. The doctor will tell us that, but actually we can be our own doctor if we apply the teaching. And then the third noble truth is that there is a way of tackling the causes of the illness. It's not just that there are ways of stopping the illness, stopping the causes of suffering, but it's actually wanting to stop the causes. So this is the thing, unless we know how sick we are and that what it could lead to, we're not going to be able to take medicine. Okay? So this third noble truth, this looking at stopping the causes, but also wanting to stop the causes. So as it says in that quote there from one of the Buddha's discourses there, the noble truth of cessation of suffering, it is remainderless fading and cessation of that same craving. Rejecting, so craving, holding on to this sense of self, rejecting, relinquishing, leaving and renouncing of it. Okay, so renouncing, that word renouncement is a very big one in Lam Ren. Generating the wish to not create any more of the causes and to start looking at the cures. This is the suffering has an end, cessation. Okay, so it's as much as stopping the cause of suffering. It's as much about wanting to stop the cause of suffering, just generating renunciation. So so far we've been looking at the causes of suffering. The truth of suffering that exists and the causes to help develop the sense of renunciation. So this is another method to help develop renunciation, help develop the wish to end cyclic existence, end this wheel of birth, death, old age, sickness and death that we're in, which is called samsara. Then the second way is said to be contemplating the 12 links of dependent origination. So Yangtze Rinpoche says, Yangtze Rinpoche is the one who wrote the book on practicing the path. Okay? So he says it's just a different way of generating renunciation, looking at the 12 links. And he says, he actually says that, just looking at the top of page 4, that it's for those for sharper intellect. So when I looked at that, I thought, okay, so that's definitely not me, because actually the 12 links are very interesting. I like them, and particularly like looking at the wheel of life, which is incredibly graphic. The picture of the last page we've got there, that actually illustrates the 12 link. We've got a tanka of that in the big gompa, quite a big one. And if you're going to any monastery, Tibetan monastery, usually that's on the outside of the entrance to the monastery. Remember in Sarah, nearly all those big monasteries, those big temples had fantastic, very beautifully painted wheels of life on the outside. What they're doing, reminding you that you're actually in samsara. That's really what it depicts. Basically the jaws of death that you're in. I think this is the Lord of Death, the person who's holding the wheel of life. Yeah. So Yangtze Rinpoche says it's another way for people who are of sharper intellect. He says that just by contemplating the 12 links, they will develop strong renunciation. But I actually found, I was thinking very carefully, what sort of, I'm definitely not renounced, but contemplating the different levels of suffering, to me, actually has more impact. So I'm not one of sharpening that stuff, which I don't mind, there are other ways. So you can look, after you've sort of studied the first noble truth and those different levels of suffering, and then maybe a look at the 12 links. You can decide which one's the most helpful. Both of them are helpful. Both of them are very good. So, as Lama Zobi says, he says you should relate to these 12 links to our daily life. It makes it very clear how everything came from the mind, and everything is to do with karma. How all our own happiness and suffering, right, came from our own mind. And from that mind, the nearest one, there is ignorance. The nearest affliction, I think it means, there is ignorance, karma, and then there is consciousness. Present, last birth, all the aggregates. This samsara, where we're in now, the foundation of all the problems. He says it helps us to realise those. Okay. So basically, what the 12 links are not necessarily the sequential in time. They're not necessarily the first link has to happen, and then the next one happen, and then the next one happen. So I think that was the mistake I first made when I was trying to study the links, because they can be happening at the same time. Different links can be, karma can be forming and coming to fruition. It doesn't have to happen one after the other in that order of 12. But each link is interrelated. It's true. Each link is interrelated. It's true. Okay, so I've given you the picture. It's quite a nice picture. I can't say I understand. I certainly know what the outside rim is. That's the wheel of life. So each one of those outside pictures, there's 12 of them, illustrates one link in the chain. So one with the cane. Okay, so sort of the top one, slightly to the right, where 1 o'clock probably would be. That's where you start. And you can't see it very clearly, but that is a blind old woman with a cane. And then it goes anti-clockwise. From that's ignorance. Ignorance is blind woman with a cane. And then karma, we'll go through each one right round until the very last one, which is, I will memorise them there, aging and death. So the aging of death is carrying a person carrying a corpse on their back. Actually, that is. Sometimes it's hard to actually see it in the picture. And then the inner circle, you see it's sort of divided up like a cave. There's actually, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments. I think they're the different realms. I'm going to look. I think they're the different realms. I'm going to look. I tried to find that link. I've got, see where it says Interactive Wheel of Life.
Yeah.
Last year I got access to it. I used, it's on BuddhaNet. I've got the link there. But this time I tried twice and it wouldn't connect. Have you tried it?
Yeah, because I know you longer using Flash, the browsers. So what I did was I went in and I downloaded the SWF file, which is the actual file.
Oh,
and then I downloaded Adobe Viewer, like an Adobe Viewer, and I could just view it on my laptop. So I could get that for you.
Oh, okay. I'll try and do that. If you can get it as well, in case I don't succeed.
Yeah, I'll bring it for you on a little.
Okay, we can sort of try. That's great. So for people who might want to try what you just said, downloading. Just say it again. Sorry.
It's an SWF file.
Right.
I can bring it.
Okay. So you're much more computer literate than I can tell.
I'm working on it.
But actually,
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm there going, this is interesting.
So for people out there, if anyone watching, we're going to, Julie's kindly going to bring in a file and we'll actually put it on the computer next week. Okay, but last week I just clicked it, last year I just clicked it and it came on, so I might have had slightly different software.
No, it's because the browsers have discontinued that function.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Flash
so did you see it? It was good actually. I remember when I saw it.
I remember, and then this time I played it the same, so it shows the areas that you can point on. And
right.
Talk to you,
so you just put the mouse over an area and it comes up.
So pop up and then you can just hover over each section.
Fantastic. Okay. But that will really help. So that will actually give full explanation and probably bigger pictures of each. It's the same picture, is it?
It's the same thing, yeah.
Same picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except it's, because it's on your computer screen, it's a bit bigger.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other things out there that,
Yeah.
Explain how,
There's Wheel of Life would probably come up with thousands and thousands of hits, yeah. So so we'll just have it probably come up with thousands and thousands of hits, yeah. So so we'll just have a quick look around that wheel. We'll do the look at the outside. So ignorance, of course, is number one because it sort of underlines what I've been saying again and again. Is it means ignorance of how each of these words means something quite specific. So the holding on to the sense of self as existing concretely, eternally, that's the one that starts with a wish to hold on to that idea and to want to exist as a self. So his Holiness Dalai says, it's the moment of the innate ignorance grasping the person as inherently existent that leads to rebirth in samsara. Okay, so within the cycle of rebirth, at the end of death, if the person's grasping at the sense of I, they want to be reborn. Okay, so they want to exist. So this is grasping at the sense of self, because when you die, you lose your body and you lose all these what we call aggregates. And so unless we've done some practice and we're getting used to the idea of losing, we want to, for an ordinary being, they want to be reborn as quickly as possible. They want to hold on to the sense of self. And so they may not be lucky enough to get a rebirth as a human, but they will get reborn as some sort of being. So depending on karmic imprints. So that's why Holly says it's this moment of ignorance of grasping the person as inherently existent that sort of starts us in the cycle after we die. So this is the end of one life, throwing us into the next. So what does Swami says? So he says, well, the woman is blind because we can't see where we're going. We're unenlightened beings, we can't actually see where the next life's going to be. Great beings like His Holiness would have control over the death, but was reborn where he was. And so we can follow the lives of great beings from one birth to the other because they choose their rebirth. They've got control of death and rebirth. So ignorance. Guru Shakyamuni explained 12 links relating to external evolution. The plant, ignorance, is the originator, the creator of samsara. It is like the farmer. So the farmer, he said, the farmer and ignorance, Namazopa, saying is the person who's sort of in control of what's going to happen in the field. So this is ignorance, the farmer, sort of very powerful, sort of organizer or controller. So the next one, number 2, it's also called volitional forms or formative action. Formative action. So it's a particular, this is what they call throwing karma. We did this when we did the unit on karma. Throwing karma is the one at the time of death, that ripens at the time of death, that actually throws you into the next rebirth. Okay, so if you've got it, then your throwing karma would be to throw you into another perfect human body where you have all the conditions to continue in the perfect human rebirth. That's ideal. You can get that. So this is the throwing karma. So this is like the field. The farmer, first one, ignorance is the farmer. The karma is the field, and the actual image is a potter making a pot. Which is quite interesting because I think potters say that they're going to throw a pot. Don't they use the word throw? If they're going to make a pot, they put clay on it and they. I'm pretty sure they use the word throw in there. They say, I'm getting, instead of making a pot, they say, I'm going to throw a pot or throw something. So that's, anyway, it's to do with throwing karma. So the picture is, so the karma, the potter is the karmic seed that's going to determine what shape the pot is. That's the rebirth. That's the throwing karma. The pot is the next rebirth. Number 3, the consciousness, which is the monkey leaping about. So we can see that quite clearly, the monkey there in the tree. So this means it's has two parts according to the explanation. It has the cause, the action done, and its imprint pressed into the consciousness, and the time of the result when the action ripens. So that seed has to ripen on consciousness. Okay? Consciousness is like the soil that the seed lands on. So Lamazota says, oh no, it's the seed. It's the seed. So this is the seed. Is the reality. The seed holding the potential. Okay? So the seed is the result of the karmic cause, and it's going to actually have the result in it. So a seed has the potential, if the conditions are right, to come to fruition to whatever the type of seed is. If it's a tomato, it will end up a tomato. If the karmic imprint is a oak tree, the genetic imprint is the physical equivalent, it will turn into an oak tree, etc. But the consciousness holds the potential or the imprints left by karma. And from the imprint, the seed comes. From the imprint, which is the seed, comes various lives, happy, suffering, or various different types of lives. Like the seed of the plant. Okay, number 3. Next one, name and form. So this is strange. The actual words need some explanation. So name refers to the mind, and form refers to the body. And the image is a person rowing a boat. And I think the boat would be the body, and the person would be the mind. So the seed germinates or comes in fruition in terms of a human body as a body and mind. So form is the body and name is the mind. That's the way I sort of think that's what they're saying there. So the mind includes mental aggregates. Form, there's different functions of the mind: form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and the body is the embryo that begins in the form in the womb. The first conception from the embryo is formed. Name are the mental aggregates that engage with objects, which gives them name and form. So we have this thing of embryo in the body at the time of conception, and it's waiting to take effect, so to speak. So all the senses are not yet generated, but we've got this, the boat, which is the body, and the name, which is the mind. The body and mind, in its very early stages, is there. Number 4. Then the 6 sense powers, empty house with 6 windows. So these are the 6 senses, the 6 windows. So it's empty, said to be empty because the sense powers have the potential to develop in the embryo, but they haven't yet formed. The sense of touch apparently has formed. It's the first thing that's formed in the embryo, according to the Buddhist explanation. But the other ones, sight, sound, taste, etc., haven't actually. They're not actually able to register those things yet at that time. So the house is empty. So, so the next one is as the is contact. It's called in the image is sexual union. Where are we? We're right down at the bottom of that wheel. You can see the two people sleeping together there. So this is called contact, represented by two people in sexual union. So this is where the sense powers makes contact with their objects. Contact distinguishes an object as attractive or ugly, neutral or neutral. Right? So when we give the example of the eye faculty, when it's developed, it needs the power to see something. That means an eye consciousness. It needs an object, a table to look at, and it also needs a mind to register on. It's a bit like film, I suppose, the mind. So that's the previous moment of consciousness. So there are these three conditions for sense consciousness to arrive: an object, a consciousness, sense consciousness, and I gave the example of seeing a table. So you need the eye consciousness, and then you need a previous moment of consciousness. So according to Buddhist psychology, they say for you to actually experience seeing something, you need those three things. And it's the same with tasting something or hearing something. The contact, it's all represented as contact. So feeling, okay. So feeling is represented by this rather shocking image of somebody with an arrow in their eye. So that's to show how we overestimate or exaggerate what we see with the senses. And so from that contact, when we make contact with something, we see it as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So it's not emotions. Let's make it very clear that this is not the feeling whether we feel happy or sad. So it's to do with sensory feeling, whether something is we like or don't like, so on. Whether it feels pleasant or unpleasant. So so from the way we label that, so if we see something we really like, the next step is to want it, which leads us to the next one, which is craving, represented by a man getting drunk. You can see him, I think he's got a pot or something, a bottle of red or something there. having a complete session there. So this is from the feeling, we like the alcohol, we want it, okay? We don't want to be separated, so if we're drinking wine, we want another one. So it's like drinking salt water. They often say that being addicted to sense pleasure is like drinking salt water because you can never get satisfied. The more you eat the delicious food, actually, the more you want, but you're going to get more suffering. It will turn into suffering. The second type of suffering, the suffering of change. So seeing, Lumsdorff says, the craving is seeing the object you want in the window and wanting that. And the next one is actually taking steps to get it, which is grasping. So it's going from liking it, that's feeling, craving, going to the next step, and going to, making intention to have it, and grasping is to doing what you need to get it. A strong sense of craving. Craving and grasping come under attachment. Okay, so it could be not just this physical, very obvious example we've got of a man getting drunk and liking alcohol, but could cover things like we mentioned before, extreme views, or money, or ideas, a sense of self-persons, that there is this me in here that I have to protect and I have to look after at the expense of others, more important than others. So this holding onto a self-person can be grasping. Also, certain ascetic practices. The Hippolytus gives the example of fasting. This is one thing the Buddha tried when he was left the palace trying to join a group of ascetics who were abusing. They weren't looking after their bodies. They said they decided that you can't get enlightened if you start looking after your body because it's an indulgence. So they were almost starving themselves. So extreme fasting. The Buddha tried it and then decided that was not the right way. You had to look after the bodies, like the boat was going to take you to enlightenment. Animal sacrifice, often put it up as an example of grasping at a wrong view. Samsara often uses that example because it's living in India and Nepal. They have these shocking animal sacrifice on certain days of the year. The Hindus think, by killing certain numbers of animals, then they'll be able to please certain deities. I'm not sure which the Hindu deity it is. So they have this rather horrible. And he says this is an example of wrong, grasping at a wrong view, and one of those afflictions, wrong views. Existence, number 10, where are we? A pregnant woman. So, this is, I think, it's represented by a pregnant woman, and I think from what I've meant from hearing teachings somewhere else, is that if we give an example of when we die, the Buddhists say that if we're not enlightened being, we have a kind of rebirth as what we call a bardo being. It's a being that's looking for another life. The bardo is not a pleasant place to be. So it's the being that's looking for the next life after death. And so I think this is what exists. The pregnant woman represents the wish to form another life. The ripening of the karmic seed just about to produce the next life, wanting existence. Think of it. Not perfect all these explanations, but I'm just sort of using what I can find in the text. So, so that's the pregnant woman. Then birth, of course. We think when you first see it, you think it's represented by a woman giving birth. But when we read the explanation, it said it's not birth; it's actually conception. But they can't actually show that. So they show a woman giving birth. But the first moment of a new life, according to Buddhist teachings, is the moment of conception. Okay, so the moment of conception is said to be birth, and from that moment on, aging and death happens. Okay, from that first second of conception, the evolving being is undergoing aging and death. So that's the last one, 12, aging and death. Okay, so interesting. Remember that it doesn't have to be no order because death can happen with young people. They don't necessarily have to have aging before death. I could remind that. This ends. Death ends this life. The cycle of existence continues again. So the throwing karma. If the being wants to be reborn, there'll be another life following that one. Okay, so that's actually, I think next week I'll look more, there's quite a good explanation of the 12. So I just put a little bit of what Yangtze Rinpoche says there, which you can have a look at. But I think next week we'll just look a bit more at the explanation of the 12 limbs. What we've done is just looked at the symbolism really so far. If you look, one thing I do understand quite easily is that very middle part, like the bullseye in the middle of the wheel of life, you've got the pig, the peacock, or the bird, and the snake. Anyone know what that stands for? The pig is the ignorance. The snake, the peacock, I think, is attachment. And the snake is usually anger. But, I'll just check on that and let you know next week. So the ignorance of not having realization of emptiness is represented here, and from that is the idea of attachment come. And I think that's the peacock, and I think the snake doesn't quite fit in, but there must be another. No, I'll let you know. Everybody do some research and find out what jump the snake is. It's homework for next week. And also, when we get the actual interactive download, we might be able to get explanations of what those all the segments are. I think it's the. Do you remember? There's definitely. I think it's the human realm, the animal realm. Yeah, I think the bottom one is the predator realm. The hell realm is the very black one, and I think the other two might be the different god realm, the diva realm.
One is the god realm, like a demigod.
Gods and demigods. Yeah. So they represent these different realms, sometimes with different categories. But I think that might be it. So we'll have a look at that next week. That's probably enough, I think. So let's do our let's sort of practice. It's good to do some meditation. So the one observation is attachment. So this is one that if you're looking for a whole collection of meditations from How to Meditate, is probably the best book with them all there by Kathleen MacDonald, fantastic teacher of meditation. So it's based on her teachings, but also Alan Wallace gave a really good meditation on attachment at his last teachings here in Sydney, 2019. So basically he says, so this is the definition of attachment, the formal definition, is a mental function, something that happens in the mind, that sees an contaminated object as attractive and wishes to acquire it. Mental functions, an action, something happens in our mind, that we see an object contaminated because we're looking at it through our unenlightened mind as attractive and wants to acquire it. So we're looking at something and we like it. It's the opposite to aversion, which is not wanting that object, which is the counter side of it, the other side of the coin. They're very closely connected, attachment and aversion. So we're seeing the object through our afflictions and karma. You know the two causes of suffering, afflictions and karma. The object through our afflictions and karma. You know the two causes of suffering, afflictions and karma. He says, until we become enlightened being, just about everything we see is contaminated. This is what Venerable Adrian said when he gave his teaching. So we exaggerate the good qualities. She says we're putting too much icing on the cake. We're putting qualities that are not there on the object, or we see some qualities and we're inflating them, giving them much more importance than they really are. So it's said that the best object, because we can be attached to objects, to ideas, to persons. So they say for this practice, if it fits what you like, you use a person that we've actually had a really close attachment to. It could be a romantic attachment that has since stopped. Or if you've got something that you know will work for you, something that you're very attached to, some item, person or idea, you can use that. So Alan Watts says the near enemy of loving kindness is attachment. It's mostly if we have a feeling of love to somebody, it's mixed with attachment. Love is just defined as looking after somebody's needs and wanting them to be happy, whereas attachment is more about us, concerned with my needs. This person will satisfy what I want, will make me feel whole, and so on. So mostly love is said to be mixed with attachment in our current state as ordinary beings. So the thing with love mixed with attachment is that as the situation changes, the person either rejects us or we see things that we didn't see before, the feelings will change, and we lose the object of attachment. So when we lose the object of attachment through their action or our, we feel this sort of loss. So the idea of meditation is definitely not to become cold and indifferent, detached, so that we don't feel anything, but it's to see things more as they are, set to ease. The mind is more relaxed and happy with less attachment. It's so hard to remove attachment. It's what we, the terminology is less attachment, okay? Because we can't sort of suddenly be not attached to anything. So by having less attachment, we feel the mind is happier, there's less up and down, less disappointment, less roller coaster mind. The opposite of attachment is non-attachment, and a mind that's satisfied. It doesn't have a need, it's happy with what they've got. So that state of contentment. So different ways to deal with attachment, contemplating its faults. So in that, actually, we bring to mind this person who we had a great attachment toward, and we look at the state of mind, particularly our emotional mind, the excited mind, not a peaceful mind. If we're looking at it from afar, we think we're actually really in a good state of mind, but if you look at it from a distance, the mind is very agitated. So we look at what's happening. So if we're no longer in that relationship, we can actually look back on it. We saw that person is having 100% good qualities, and we can sort of confirm that this was attachment. And we can remember what happened when things changed. Either we were rejected or there was separation. And that feeling of wanting more, that feeling of clinging, and grasping. So then the other antidote is so acknowledging the feeling, then meditation on impermanence. So meditate on that person being really old. Imagine that person who's 100% attractive. So person is with wrinkles. The other one is to imagine the person with all their parts, the internal organs, the blood, bones, excrement, and so on. Another one is to meditate on death. The best way of separating attachment to ourselves and to others, because we're going to leave everything at the time of death. And the last one is meditating on emptiness. Okay, so we won't have time to go through them all, but we'll just pick a couple of them. Okay, get comfortable, and we'll just do the practice. Okay. So coming into our breath for a few moments, just calming the mind. Coming into a clear state of mind. So we begin our practice on meditating on attachment by bringing to mind someone who we were very attached to in the past. Perhaps a first love, perhaps a strong romantic relationship that we had and then it ended. Or you can choose an object of attachment that is will work for you. So we begin by looking at what was going on in our mind during this time when we were attached to this person, how excited the mind was, very unsettled emotional mind usually, not a mind that we call clear and calm, very honest. Seeing that person as being 100% good with all good qualities, not noticing any faults, wanting to be not separated from that person for a moment. And be very absorbed in our feelings towards that person. State of mind where we really couldn't think much about others. We're so obsessed with this person. No room to think of others' needs, other situations. Not wanting to be separated from that person, that object of attachment. But when we were separated, feeling the pain, wanting to repeat that experience again with that person. With being with that person. Then recalling when that situation changed and that person was no longer close to us. Perhaps we felt anger, unhappy, depressed state of mind. Just observing our state of mind can help being aware of the faults of attachment, the disadvantages. And it was a disturbing state of mind, an affliction of the mind. Mind is hallucinating, quite deluded, not seeing its true situation, true state of what that person was, who that person was. So thinking of impermanence, can we visualize that person as an old person? We're probably very physically attached to that person. Visualizing how that person would be as an old person, 50 years time. Another way is to visualize or imagine that person as a collection of parts, organs, hearts, lungs, bones, excrement. The composition of that person under the skin. How does that affect our attraction, our attachment? The other counterforce to attachment is meditating on death. But this can apply to any form of attachment. Meditating on our mortality. That death will separate us from all loved ones, all friends, partners, possessions, wealth, our home, our treasured enjoyments, even our own body, the ultimate loss, separation from all at the time, no room for attachment at the time. And remembering that at the time of death, the less attachment we have, the easier it is to have easy death to let go. The only thing that will help at the time of death is our state of mind, a relaxed, unattached state of mind. Furthermore, we generate the thought of detachment from things we are attached to, including our own body, the easier it will be at the time of death. Neither the I that is attached or the object we're attached to has any independent self-existence. We're contemplating the emptiness of the I that is attached and the object we're attached to. Therefore, dependent on causes and conditions that change moment by moment. Moment by moment. For the conclusion, meditating on the shortcomings of attachment helps us let go. Let go of concrete stuff. Let go of things that we are attached to. Let go of things that we are attached to. Helps us to develop renunciation. Helps to develop compassion, loving kindness, equanimity. Dedicating any positive merit from this practice, from tonight's teaching, or the practice we've done and will do in the future, to develop less attachment, less holding. Less clinging to self and self. And also, just remembering Lama Zopa's special dedication for the coronavirus, having however many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed from all sickness. May all the sickness, without exception in the world, of all transmigrating beings, never occur again. May perfect peace and happiness prevail in everyone's hearts and minds. May Buddha Dharma last for a long time. May sentient beings in this world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Okay, so thanks so much for being there, and both out there and in here. I'll see you again next week. Have a great week. Okay. So I'll just switch off the streaming. See you next week.